Elsa and Tori and Ruth for inviting me to chair. I feel a bit humble sitting next to my fellow panellists, but I'll do my best. So I thought I would kick off just with actually everyone giving their own introduction briefly, because you'll probably do a much better job of it than I can. So to start off with myself, I'm Stephanie and I work as editorial assistant at a children's publisher called Award Publications, very small, independent. I used to work in quite a large academic publishing house as well, so I've worked in a variety of different sectors within the industry. And I've just become the chair of the New Society of Young Publishers Northern Branch, so hopefully you'll be hearing a lot from us pretty soon and maybe attending our events and getting involved. And so I will pass on to Kevin.
Can you hear me without the microphone?
Yes.
I definitely am.
Not usually satisfactory kind of microphone. Yeah, my name's Kevin Duffy, and 10 years ago I started Bloom's Books with my wife Heather. We publish literary fiction. We're based in Hebden Bridge. Our authors have won national, international literary prizes. Our books have been published into many different foreign languages. We've sold TV rights to and film rights to 20th Century Fox, Channel 4, ITV, and our books are sold in over 43 countries. That's me.
Hello. My name is Paul. My pen name is P.S. Ferns. I am the author of the Element Order series, young adult fantasy fiction, realm fantasy. I'm actually a choreographer by trade. I trained at LIPA in Liverpool. 2012, I had an idea for a story, a long one. Decided to give it a go. Not thinking anything, no idea, oh, I'm going to be a published author. Sent it to an editor, and she called me and said, I suggest you try and get this published, and here I am now.
Hi, I'm Jake Hope. I'm a freelance children's book consultant. What that means is that I do a variety of different things, including working on events, doing reviews of various different books. I do judging of prizes, so a variety of different things really, and have a good overview as a consequence of that, of the way that different trends are emerging across the market and things. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Dea Parkin. I run Fiction Feedback, which is an editorial consultancy which I started in 2008. I operate with a stable of editors, and we critique work, we offer reviews and constructive feedback, and we also offer editorial services. Earlier this year, I've always had a passionate interest in crime fiction, and I was lucky enough to be asked if I'd like to be secretary of the Crime Writers Association. So I'm busy doing that as well these days. That's great.
Thank you. Okay, so as I can imagine, with the nature of this panel discussion, I can imagine there's probably quite a lot of budding authors in the room. So this might be quite a loaded question to start off with, but I'm going to hit Paul and Kevin with one. So obviously there's a lot of differing views on whether or not it is incredibly difficult now to get published. You can hear people saying it's harder and harder, but on the flip side, people are saying, okay, well, so now that there's more channels to be able to get your work out there, it's actually easier. So from a writer's and a publisher's point of view, I thought it'd be quite interesting to hear your perspective on that. And we'll start with Kevin.
Yeah, traditional publishing route is the agent's route, which I have a huge problem with, but we can talk about that later, where the big six publishers, kind of HarperCollins, Random House, Penguin, Macmillan, Simon & Schuster, they don't see unsolicited manuscripts. They will only take manuscripts via agents. So if you're a budding author and you want to go down that route, you have to get an agent, which is very, very difficult these days. And agents tend to kind of follow trends in publishing. So if you've got a crime novel, it might be easier to get an agent if you've got a kind of literary fiction book. Independents are different in that they were like Blueberry's books. We're in literary fiction independent. We will we see manuscripts unsolicited. So if you get the Artists and Writers Yearbook, which is the Bible for writers, in there will be a list of traditional publishers, agents and independent publishers. Independents will see the first 3 chapters of your synopsis, the first 3 chapters of your manuscript plus a synopsis, and they'll get back to you. The other kind of routes to publishing are self-publishing, and that can be done via kind of Amazon, KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing. It can be done via crowdsourcing, which I think Paul will probably talk about later. One of the ways you can get published as well is vanity publishing. I would steer well away from anybody who asks you for money up front. If anybody asks you for money up front, they're not a traditional publisher, they're not a kind of publisher. They're basically trying to kind of get as much money out of you as possible. If you can afford £5,000 to get 10 books published to go out to friends and family, that's fine. But otherwise, kind of stay clear of kind of vanity publishing. So those are the kind of the 4 or 5 routes you can get into publishing from a publishing point of view. So Paul will tell you about.
I actually went down the crowdfunding route. I'd never heard of it before. I did spend a good 8 or 9 months trying to get agented, exhausted myself. I mean, I got a couple of agents said, send us the first 3 chapters or send us the first 10,000 words, which I did, never heard anything back. I did get one word, which is send a partial, so, and it was specifically so it was a quarter of the book. Unfortunately with that, you've really got to sell it in that first kind of, if it's 20,000 words, really sell it in 20,000 words. So I did spend about 8 months getting nowhere, basically. Then my editor actually contacted me with an advertisement that she'd seen in a literary magazine from a company called Britain's Next Bestseller. And the way they work is they'll read your manuscript, and if they think that it will sell, and they like your kind of pitch to them, and they gain a trust from you, then they'll take you on board. And I had 3 months, 12 weeks to put together my own marketing campaign. I had to do all my own PR, create my own publicity, a trailer for the book, design the front cover, social media, so creating a Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram. And basically in that 12 weeks you have to sell, I had to sell 250 copies of the book, and if I sold 250 copies of the book, then I got a publishing deal on that book. Luckily I did get the 250 copies, predominantly through social media, so that was great. That got published in January of last year, and then the same again happened for the second book, but they actually allowed me fewer copies, because obviously I was building a relationship with them, and the second book came out in May. So I think now, with the option of crowdfunding, if you are good at marketing and you are good at PR and you've got a business head, it is a lot of hard work, but it's worth going down that route, because then you get in help. Because when you self-publish as well, you kind of having to edit it yourself and get you sub-edit yourself and get your final edit done, and that's not good for me. I mean, there might be people who are good writers and editors. I'm a terrible editor. I don't want to edit, I hate it, I can't bear it. I can't even bear reading, to be honest. I don't read. It's such a bad thing for me now. I watch films and look at sculpture and play PlayStation 4. And that's where PS4 is amazing for me to get all my inspiration from. So if someone says to me, can you read this book? No. Can you please? No. I just can't. So, doing the crowdfunding thing, you're getting all that help as well. Do you know what I mean? The company that do it with me published me. There's not a massive marketing campaign. If I'd have sold like 500 to 1,000 copies, they'd have given me a big marketing campaign, but I just got the minimum. So I do all the marketing myself. So I do haul myself out quite a lot on social media.
I just think we get the word boring tonight.
Angela Hocking was the first Kindle KDP author to become a millionaire selling her books. But she said that she spent 82% of her free time on social media. So that's what traditional publishing will take away. They will give you they will do the marketing for you, and then you can write. But there are kind of pluses and cons.
As a perspective from what I do day to day, I'm part of one of the very few that I'm aware of children's publishers who take all of our submissions unsolicited. So if you see it in the Right to the Novice yearbook, it will say that we take unsolicited manuscripts. As a result, I do receive a lot, absolutely a lot. So there's a huge sort of need and desire out there for people to be published, especially in the children's publishing industry. It was interesting actually, Radio 4 on the way over here in the car where I had a discussion going with Charlotte, the Guardian bookseller, children's editor, Barley Ryan, and a couple of other people, and what was interesting is that they had a speaker on there from Pushkin Press who opened up their submissions for 24 hours to anybody who was unsolicited, and they received over 500 manuscripts in a single day. So it just goes to show how much people want to be published and just how many people out there are published. So to say if somebody was to go down the route that maybe Paul took, or for whichever reason were lucky enough to be published, especially in the children's and YA industry, I thought, Jake, it'd be interesting to get your point of view on this, because children's and YA specifically, they are struggling a lot for review space in the mainstream media, but social media, it is definitely the most popular category there is at the minute that I perceive anyway. So being somebody who's involved in that, what's your point of view on that? Is it hard for people to shout out about their books?
I think we've got a major problem in this country when it comes to reviews of children's books and young adult titles. They account for around about a third of the book sales in the UK. They get next to no dedicated space whatsoever. The Guardian had a fantastic website, the Guardian Children's Book website, which unfortunately has just come to an end now. So I think what we are seeing is there's this massive grassroots movement happening where, particularly in the young adult field, where people are reviewing, they're blogging, they're creating sort of their own social media campaigns around books and authors. And I think that is superb, and it creates real momentum and interest. But I think it needs to be in tandem with traditional reviews, and there needs to be a quality review as well, because what happens when it's all done via social media is that there isn't actually a quality monitor there. There isn't actually a background in terms of how that's happening. Most children's book reviews in the past have tended to be very educationally based. If you look at somewhere like the United States, actually they have a much more sophisticated and structured review process over there. They've got dedicated journals. And for some reason we don't have that here. So I think there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done. And I think in doing that, it actually opens up the market appreciably. So, yeah.
Dee, so from an editorial point of view, maybe you could talk a little bit about your company. When an author has their finished manuscript and they're looking to send it out to give it to publishers or to agents, at what point do you think it's important to get as polished a manuscript as possible? For example, some of the manuscripts I get are fantastically written, but a lot of them are not. At what point do you think that they should be trying to get professional help?
It's a very different answer that I give now to how it would have been maybe 10 or 15 years ago. I mean, 10 or 15 years ago, agents and publishers who accepted unsolicited manuscripts would look at a book and they might have time to look beyond all the typos, let's be kind, and they would perhaps take it on anyway because they've got in-house editors, they know that they can take care of all that kind of thing. Nowadays it's very different. Nowadays no self-respecting agent or publisher is going to take on anything at all, unless you're famous, of course, that isn't already polished to a degree. I'm not saying perfection, but these days, I just don't think it's worth submitting something that isn't the very best that you and a professional can help to make it. I'm sort of talking more about the copy editing stage there, but if you go further back, then I'd also recommend that anybody with something sort of doesn't immediately think of submitting to an agent or to a publisher, but takes care over it to get it as good as it possibly can be. And if that means getting a professional critique, or maybe going along to a class and getting some feedback from people who know about these things, then I think that's very worthwhile and should pay dividends for you later. Because the worst thing to do really is to have a draft, and it is only a draft, and to send it out to agents and get either no reply at all or get knockbacks. And I find that you've gone through almost every agent that would possibly take your piece of work. And then you sort of go along to something, a seminar like this, and have your eyes opened a little bit to the kind of things that you could be doing to make your manuscript better. And but by that time you've sort of queered your pitch, as it were. It's very difficult to go back to an agent with the same work and say, oh, please would you consider me, I've done a lot of work on it. It's not impossible, but make it easy for yourself from the start and get as much professional help as you can from the off. And I'm not saying, we're not all in a situation where we can afford to pay for it, I understand that. But there are groups out there, there's writers' circles, there's forums online, there's all sorts of places where you can get that help. And my biggest piece of advice really to anybody looking now to try and get their work, to get a traditional publishing contract, would be to look at their writing. Once you've finished the first draft and had that pleasure, to look at it from there on in as a business and to approach it as a business, to approach it professionally and deal with it from there.
What did you say? Editors now, commissioning editors from the big publishing houses, they almost use agents as the kind of editorial process. So once they receive a manuscript from an editor, they would deem that virtually publishable. But they obviously do kind of more work to it, but they would expect it to be nearly there, so that they don't have to spend time telling it. Kind of one of the publishing bibles of the publishing world is a thing called the bookseller. So most central libraries have the bookseller, and I read in there many years ago that all the big money was going to new Irish writers. So I changed my name to Colin O'Driscoll and sent the first 3 chapters off. And I did get a kind of deal. You don't have to transmogrify or translate, but it is a way to become a different person.
Reading off from that then, if once an author has the manuscript ready and they're as happy as they can be with it before they want to be able to send it off, so it's then down to who should they send it to, and in that way, what should they be looking for in a publisher? What should they be looking out for in terms of what they think will fit an independent or one of the big 5, for instance? What do you think that an author should be doing in terms of research in order to be able to find that fit? Or do you think it's a case of send it and send it and send it again?
I think J.K. Rowling just went, her agent began with C, so she just went through the other, we're not all J.K. Rowling. I think whoever you choose, whichever agent you choose, or whichever publishers you're looking at, I think you've got to look at what books they're publishing, what your, if you're particular genre, if it's science fiction, if it's crime, if it's literary fiction, make sure that the book that you've written fits into what they're publishing. And if you're looking for an agent, look at the agent, and then on the website it will have who they look after. Look at the authors that they look after and see what kind of books that the authors are writing. So if your book corresponds to what that agent is marketing, then you can send it. Don't send a YA book to somebody who just does literary fiction, or don't send a crime book to somebody who does literary fiction, or vice versa. That's where your homework comes in. And that also tells the agent and the publisher that you're serious about your writing. Don't get into writing if you want to make any money, because you won't. You might, but that shouldn't be your first criteria. The first criteria is that you're really passionate about writing and you've got a story to tell. And I know this is a bit crass, but the blurb on the back of a book, it's almost like the Hollywood, the lift pitch. Make sure that you can encapsulate in your head within the space of 10, 15 words, what your story is about. Because you might sometimes only get, 5-10 minutes at an event like this to give you a picture or whatever. But so just think about kind of sales and marketing already in your head before you send a letter out to an agent or a publisher. So that's where you do your homework.
Yeah, sorry, just to add to that, make sure you read the submission guidelines as well on agency websites, because they are all so different. I mean, I made the mistake initially of just copying and pasting, and then I'd read back, oh God, because some want this, some want that, some want this, and you have to send a cover email first before sometimes you just have to write 250 words in the body of an email, but then some others don't want it in the body of an email, they want it as an attachment.
It's almost like a CV or
and every agent is different, and it's almost like, and you kind of sit there like, for God's sake, can't you just do the same thing? So then it's not even a case of you can sit, right, okay, I'm going to pick these 10 agents and I'm going to do this. To do 10 agents, it would probably take you a week to get through those 10 agents with the different, it took me about 2 months just to write what I was going to write in the body of an email. And I sent that to friends, and I sent that to my editor. It's so difficult because you've really got to get that initial selling. And like you say, the second you start emailing an agent, you're a business and that's it. Your marketing, your PR, everything, even down to just your author photograph. You've got to make sure that your photograph, don't make it look like a knitting pattern from the 80s. Don't make it look like, I'm a dancer, all of my portfolio, I've hardly got any clothes on. Either in tights or something. So I had to do this whole new shoot just to get one headshot. Do you know what I mean? Now it's really serious kind of author, just taking a graveyard. It's amazing. But it was kind of like, I'm writing science fiction, I'm writing realm fantasy, so some quite dark elements to the series. So I needed to have, in the look of my face, oh right, okay, he writes like kind of dark stuff or fantasy stuff, not have a big smile on my face that I'm doing like children.
And it also shows that you're professional.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And black and white always works.
Yeah, well, a couple of anecdotes of mine. I had a submission where the children's author had a picture of himself in a t-shirt with a naked lady on the front. Don't do that. Don't email me and say you'd absolutely love to work for Anderson Press when I don't work at Anderson Press. And don't send really, really quite cute illustrations accompanying your book of people getting tortured in a dungeon. Again, it's not really going to go down very well in the children's book. So it is almost like you are applying for a job in a way. Make sure that you do your research and you make sure that everything is appropriate and you present yourself as best as you can, because I didn't bother reading the Anderson Press manuscript because they didn't like me that much. They didn't even know who they were emailing. And that sounds ruthless, but when you're receiving hundreds and hundreds of manuscripts a week, there has to be some easy way of whittling it down. But actually, Jay, in your experience, once you have found that publisher, do you find that reviews and coverage and marketing, do you think that there is any form of privilege in being with a larger publisher? Do you think independents find it harder to get their voice out there, or is that changing?
I think it is changing, but it's changing slowly. There are definite benefits to being with one of the big five publishers. They have an awful lot of marketing spend and push behind them. They run media showcase events whereby the media will all be there, they'll have representatives there, and there'll be pictures about the forthcoming season work they've got coming out. So you instantly have this kind of momentum and this critical mass behind you. I think it is changing. I would say at the moment, for me as a reviewer, the interesting work is coming much more from independent publishers, small independent publishers, than from Big Five. I went to a media showcase event with one of those earlier this year, and it was depressing as hell, frankly, because they were talking about their ambitions being to become an entertainment industry. This was the managing director of one of the companies. They were talking about intellectual property. They weren't talking about authors at all. The entire structure of the event was based around 5 areas. One of those was the classics, and then every other one had the term brand in it. And the classics weren't classics as you would think of them. They were classic brands. So actually, the interesting work, the standalones, the unique voices, that's coming from the independent publishers. And that, I think, you see coming through more and more in terms of reviews. I think you see that coming through more and more in terms of the awards that are there. I think, sadly, there is still a stigma around self-published books. A lot of awards won't accept self-published books at all. It's just an absolute no. That's gradually changing, but it is a slow process.
So as social media seems to be encouraging more and more reading and writing, have you seen an impact on sort of your area of the industry? Are you seeing more and more people wanting to write? Or is also the content that you're seeing, are you seeing a lot of originality, or is it a case of a very saturated market?
That's an interesting question. Certainly there's a heck of a lot of people wanting to write out there. It's become almost a trend and a fashion, I think. Whereas it didn't used to be, you used to get the one person in the class who wanted to be a writer, didn't you? And now you get far more than that. The quality of the work that comes in, it varies. I mean, I'm often very impressed by it. I mean, there's times when we turn down work because someone sent it in for copy editing, which is really sort of the last thing that you do, and it's nowhere near being ready for that. It's more of a stage where they need to go to a writing class, to be honest. They really don't know the first thing about writing novels. But that's a very small percentage of what we see. Most of it is pretty good, and I think, to be honest, that's reflected in the fact that somebody has got the nous to realise that they need professional input. And just getting to that stage, I think, is a positive. They realise they need that, and therefore they tend to be perhaps a more professional writer, if that sounds okay. They're more serious about it in the first place, and recognise that they could benefit from that, and that their prospects as a published author, whether it's self-published and making sales, or getting a contract with a traditional publishing house, whichever way they go, their chances are improved. I think that's only happened in the last 10 years or so, really, that people have recognised that. I think when self-publishing first started, there was an awful lot of dross out there, to be frank. And I'm not saying that's not still the case, but I think more and more people are recognising that they do need that input, and that they owe it to themselves, if you like, if they're serious about their writing, to make it as good as it possibly can be.
So we're specifically talking about the YA category, obviously that's the category that you write in. When you were writing initially, did you have the idea in your head, right, I am writing a young adult novel, as Jake has pointed out, it's a massive trend at the minute, or was it a case of, I know what story I want to write, I'm going to write it, and did you categorise it as a YA? How did you go about deciding where it fits?
I had absolutely no idea what category I was writing in at all. I first thought it was science fiction, and then it wasn't. I knew it was fiction, obviously. I knew it was fantasy. It was only actually after I got my first review of the first book that I knew there was an actual title, realm fantasy. I mean, it is set in 4 alternate realms. I mean, the earth, air, fire, and water realms. So I knew it was set in realms, but I didn't know there was a category or a title, realm fantasy. What I had to do is, I just wrote, and then I thought, right, okay, on research, right, I need to find an agent. What kind of an agent? What kind of a book is it? What is this? So then, I was, obviously, I know the whole Harry Potter thing, and I know the whole Twilight thing, and the Lord of the Rings thing. That's obviously when I came up with, well, okay, it's fantasy fiction, definitely. It's young adult, because of the dialogue that I was using, the sense of humour that was running through it. An adult wouldn't necessarily find hilarious, but a young adult would. But then what I'd also done is as well, I'd done a lot of it in kind of like American dialogue, which I didn't even realise I was doing. which was really interesting because it's set in Britain. These 4 teenagers are from Cambridge, from Coventry to Cambridge, so and Slough. You know, so, but then some of the dialogue that they were using, it was American, and that was interesting because it was interesting how influenced we are by American dialogue.
I was going to say, I mean, not to compare you to children, but
no, not at all.
But like, say I've got 6 nieces and nephews, and whenever I see them play and they're role playing, they always use an American accent.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it, but they do. They use American accent.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. And my editor did slap my wrist, and I did have to go through a lot of the dialogue, and and change it because I was using American wording or American, and I got really frustrated because it was really hard. I was like, for God's sake, I'm from Manchester. Why am I using this kind of Texan kind of, you know? But yeah, I mean, I pretty much knew it was kind of like, I mean, obviously, when you write fantasy fiction or you write in young adult, you're always influenced by, you know, J.K. Rowling. You just think J.K. Rowling. And all I kept thinking, I've actually watched interviews with J.K. Rowling and just been kind of like, so amazing, you know, and you know, so I knew it was kind of like young adult. But then, again, you don't quite know because then some of the dialogue I'm using was too grown up. So it was like, well, is it... Because I couldn't distinguish whether it was young adult fiction or teen fiction. They are teenagers in the first book. They just hit 13. But it's young adult. It's not teen fiction. Do you know what I mean? But then I thought it was... Well, then I've heard this thing called urban fiction. So I was like, well, what is it that? And then I've heard this thing called high fantasy. And I was like, what's high fantasy? Which is new worlds and new creatures. You know, so anyway, I came to the meeting, it was young adult fantasy fiction, which I'm quite happy with. If anyone says it's different, I'll just cry. I'll stop writing.
On that note, Jay, how much do you think it's helpful or hindrance to try to categorise?
It's an interesting question, and one of the things that I was heavily involved in 2008 was a massive campaign that was happening across publishing at that time to age categorise every book for children. And so every book was given age guidance and had 8+, 6+, 12+, and it basically turned the entire literature for children and young people into a massive reading scheme. Actually, I don't think it matters. I think we can have endless debates about whether a book fits into young adult fiction, where the boundary between teenage and young adult lies, where the boundary between tween fiction and teenage fiction lies. At the end of the day, a great story is a great story, and readers will come to that regardless, and I think that's what's important. And readers will find their way. Look at what happened with Harry Potter, look at what happened with the curious incident of the dog in the night time, with his dark materials. Readers find good stories because that's what they're looking for.
I think the categories are mainly kind of the marketeers from the high street bookshops and Amazon. They want something, because Amazon is all about an algorithm. If they can latch on to a particular kind of 6+, 8+, whatever, then their algorithm will go into overdrive and they'll just fire it out to everyone who's bought a particular book. And that's why, because no one, when I first started many years ago, we used to go down to W.H. Smith's in Swindon, and they were the biggest bookseller at the time. And if they could pin something on a book, if they, you know, it had to be, what Scandinavian noir didn't happen then, but it had to be crime. What kind of crime? Was it raw crime? Was it kind of noir art? And so I'm thinking, it's just a good story. But they wanted something so they could tell their merchandisers where to put the book, and that's what it was all about.
And this was how the age range debate came about, because essentially it was worse than that. It was actually supermarkets, and supermarkets wanting to know where to place them. And publishers thought that this was Publishers Association thought that this was a great, Amanda Riddell, right? Thought that this was a great idea and that it would grow the market for children's books hugely if people could just put them next to the baked beans.
Did it?
It didn't actually.
For those out there who are looking to get published in the future and might be a little bit nervous or a little bit anxious about competing with the likes of, I don't know, say David Williams or you know, that sort that are currently in all the bestsellers charts. I've been doing my own mentorship and having a look at what's on the bestsellers, And for that reason, do you think, Kevin, that people are either shying away or looking towards independent publishing? Because obviously your company, Blues Books, has done incredibly well. And I think that, well, I know that a massive part of that is because that they know that you look at the manuscript for what it is. You're not biased in terms of author or genre or anything like that. Are people looking more towards independence, do you think?
I think so, but if you take Penguin Random House, which is the biggest publisher in the world, they publish 30%, nearly a third of all books in the world. It's a €30 billion operation. And their CEO every year, his mission statement says that he has to grow his company by 10%, and he has to be profitable. He has to make 10% profit, at least 10% profit, to satisfy his shareholders. So that means that they just publish stuff that is sold before. So they're becoming risk averse. So creatively, they can't take risks because he's got to satisfy his shareholders. Now, where independents come in, like myself, is that we can take creative risks. We've got to sell books, we're not a library, but we can take risks. And if a book comes in and it just touches us, or there's there's 5 editors, and we've all got different reading tastes, but if we love a story, we will publish it. But the bigger publishers, they have become kind of risk averse because they've got a different business model. Their business model is to satisfy shareholders, and it's all about units. When you were talking about branding, the CEO of Penguin, I went to a conference, and he was talking about in 2016-17, they were going to put all their marketing spend, tens of millions of pounds, behind 25 brands. He didn't even mention any authors, just 25 brands, which is the David Walliams. So that's why they're going for the big celebrity names, is that they've got impact into the market because they've got a massive big brand name. Stick a book behind it, and then you know you can guarantee some sales. I've not read Simon Mayo's book. It might be brilliant, but it was on the bloody radio. It was all over Radio 2 last week when it came out. I'm thinking, it's taken me like 8 years to get onto radio, some of our authors onto Radio 4, but you can see why they're doing it to satisfy the shareholder demand. Publishing changed in 94, 95 when the netbook agreement went, which meant that the price on the back of a book, booksellers before 1995 couldn't sell the book cheaper than that. After that, the netbook agreement went, and then you can discount. So discounts went through the roof. If I have a conversation with Amazon, the debate starts at 60% discount. I don't deal with Amazon direct, I refuse to, because it's virtually impossible to kind of make any money at all if I'm giving them 60%. So if I'm publishing a book at 10 quid, I'm on £4, I've got to do everything and pay the author. It's virtually impossible. So that's when it all changed, and that's when that's when the publishing environment became very similar to the music industry. And that's where you see in the music industry, it's the small independent labels, still like Rough Trade or whatever. They're the ones that do really exciting things because they haven't got shareholders badgering them all the time.
To what extent do you think that it's the author's place or the publisher's place to manage certain expectations off the back of this concentration of brand? Because, for instance, I'll go to the London Book Fair and I'll speak to budding children's authors, and you wouldn't believe the number of them that come to me and say, okay, so here's my children's book, and here's what the pencil case will look like, and here's what the lampshade will look like, and here's what all of this, and I expect an animation on TV and this, that, and the other, and I just think let's just calm down and concentrate on the manuscript first. And I think this perception of brand has contributed a large part of that. So, to what extent do you think it's the author's prerogative to go out there and research and make it realistic for them? Or do you think that maybe it's a publisher's or a marketer's place to...
I think I've got my kind of bête noire, and it's not all agents, but agents have a massive role to play in this, and agents really crank up the expectations of some authors, not all of them, and not all agents, so I'm not going to pop up all agents. But the vast majority of books that I get sent to agents, because they've still got their big houses in London and they've got kind of massive rents to pay and things like that, they have pushed the advances up and up and up, where advances, you know, they're not as mad as they used to be, but, you know, £500,000 advance for a book, no one's making any money on that. Even the big publishers, you know, they would have to sell 3 or 4 million copies of a book to earn that advance back. And you're thinking, why are they doing this? And it seems absolute madness. But I think, yeah, it is about kind of managing expectations. And everyone sees that J.K. Rowling's got a theme park and stuff like that. But what J.K. Rowling did was spent years and years and years and years writing and honing a craft. Because writing is a craft. You know, if you can't write, if you can't tell your story, if you can't engage with the reader with your kind of really passionate story and wonderful words and use of words, and combine that, say, with YA or with illustrations, then, you know, you're going nowhere. You can forget your pencil case and your film. It's all about the story. It's all about words. And it's hard work. It's sitting on your backside writing. You know, you've got to do at least an hour a day, every day. And that's what it's about. So it is about managing expectations. That's why when we offer contracts to authors, the first thing I say, it's like having a band when you're 16. You've got to go out and play all the kind of grotty pubs and stuff like that to build up a kind of region. And you will know, you know, if you come into it thinking you're going to make money, you won't. You can. And lots of our authors have. But if you've got to start off thinking this is going to be damn hard work. And when you read in the newspapers that an author's just been given, you know, a 7-figure fee, that is so rare. Only 4% of published authors make the minimum wage. So if you think about that, I mean, of that 4%, J.K. Rowling probably makes 90% of that 4%.
Steve, so every writer...
Keep writing.
Yeah, keep writing. Every writer in this room, Dee, will have, I assume so, each and every one of you will either have a book or part of a book, but you will most certainly have characters that you love and that you feel protective over, and the story as well. And you said earlier that, you know, after a certain point it becomes a business because you have to make sure it's as good as it can be. How fine a line is it treading when you have to try and make sure that a manuscript is as good as it possibly be when you're dealing with such passionate authors and their manuscript is their baby, and how easy or how difficult is that to manage?
Well, that is a difficult one. I do advise some people who and I've got people here in the audience who know that this is true, and I will say to some people that if their main concern is writing and they want to give their book to, say, friends and family, and they're not really interested in getting published and in having a wider audience, in selling to people they don't know, then why go down that route? Why invite criticism? Why ask somebody to murder their baby for them? Because that's inevitably what happens to a degree. So there is that to be borne in mind. But if you are serious about getting published and you are serious about your writing, then yeah, you do have to view it as a business. But what I would say is that your first draft is where you get that passion down. And after that, it's exactly as Kevin said, and it's a craft, and you start honing. And there's a joy in that as well. There's a joy in realising that this character there might not work, and maybe you take it out of that novel, but maybe that's a character that comes in another novel that you write later. Or maybe you have a character in your novel who's just playing just a minor role, but somehow he or she takes on a major part, and they've got a voice that won't be shut up. And that's a really exciting part of the writing as well. And so I think it's an ongoing process. And the secret perhaps is not to see that first draft as being the finished piece of work. It's all an evolution. And what you take out from one book, you might be able to use in another.
Thank you. So Jake, in terms of trends, in YA fiction specifically, but in the wider market, to what extent would you encourage people to follow a trend? Because obviously in book sales there's always going to be sort of a wave to ride. For instance, I know that mindfulness and inclusivity are massive topics right now, and that's fantastic creative space, but what if somebody is writing something that they think is huge on the market right now? To what extent do you think people should be following trends when they write?
I think the biggest thing to bear in mind here is the time lag that there is between writing and publishing. If you are writing something specifically to try and meet a trend, it isn't going to work, because by the time you get through the process of writing, by the time it's been through agents, publishers, that trend is going to have changed, and it changes remarkably quickly. So I would say don't do that at all. Write stories the characters that really interest you, and if that interests you and that flies off the page, then that's going to be what's successful. It's not about chasing trends. And also I think when you are chasing trends, I mean the vampire trend that started with Stephanie Meyer and the Twilight trilogy, most of the books that followed in that wake weren't really, admittedly, Twilight did nothing for me, and I'm probably not the intended readership. Sparkling vampires, I don't think we should go there. But yeah, I think an awful lot that followed that actually was quite derivative. And why would you be putting something that you've put so much effort and time into to achieve that? No, I just wouldn't.
Paul, what advice would you have for people who might get downhearted if they're either struggling, finding things difficult, either in terms of getting published or then creating a buzz around their work? How do you kind of keep your spirits up and keep the determination going?
I always find this question really hard to answer. I mean, I'm from a dance background, so before I'd even written, I was just spent years getting rejected, not getting this, not getting that, and the competitiveness, and constantly trying to compete with another dancer or choreographer or whatever. So for me, it wasn't a major issue. However, I do understand. I mean, I've got a friend who has been writing for 20 years, and she's got about 5 books, and she's petrified. She's not sent one to one agent. She will not send the manuscript because she's so terrified of sending that email with the manuscript or sending a partial or a few chapters. So, and I've always found it kind of like, babe.
Is that favourite criticism?
Yeah, I think when you write, it's just so much of yourself in it. I can't speak for every writer, but every single plot, subplot, character, storyline has got something deeply personal that happened to me. I mean, I wrote my second book, was published in May. My mum passed away in January. I don't even remember writing the book. I mean, it's a great book. It's got great reviews. But for the majority of the book, I literally wrote it, like the rest of it, finished it 2 months in the wake of the death of my mum. So it changed it massively. And I did actually hit a point where I was like, oh my God, what if this is just like become a memoir, a metaphorical memoir of where my headspace is at the minute? Luckily it wasn't. But I think for people who are constantly getting rejected, it's such a cliche, just don't take it personal. Just don't take it personal. And I do say to people, get a grip, which is quite a harsh kind of like. But if you want to write and you want to get it out there and you've got a story that you're telling and you want people to read it, then just keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going. No matter how, and some of your rejections can be really quite cutting, because I always find agents and publishing companies quite sarcastic and dry.
Are you?
No.
No?
I'm very good.
That's novel. But I had one rejection, and I could just, as I read it, I just imagined this woman stood in front of me like this. And I'm reading it. I mean, I've got a wicked sense of humour anyway, but I just imagined her sitting there like this with a fag in her hand, like this. So, don't respond to any kind of dryness or, But then I've had rejections where they've been really cool. They've been like, they don't say you know what, but the story's great, it's just not the kind of thing that we're looking for. Please don't send it again. Yeah, but yeah, get a grip. That's such a horrible thing to say, isn't it? You know, but don't get this over it. Don't be, you know, hitting the bottle. You know, which is another bit of advice. Well, don't drink and write.
No.
I deleted a whole chapter that I wrote, 5,000 words on a spaceship. There was a spaceship in the first book.
I tried to do it in university, and it wasn't good at
That was me drinking
I
some
think
of
yeah,
that.
it was good.
Gin and tonic. I did about 7 or 8, and I wrote an entire chapter about a spaceship. The detail was fantastic. The similes in it were amazing.
Well, as Lee said, save it for another novel, you never know.
Yeah, it's kept.
So how do you, Kevin, go about rejections? Do you try to be? Do you have time to?
Yeah, I reply to everybody who sent work in, and just try and be very professional and say, you know, thanks very much for sending your work in. It is very kind of subjective, but no thanks, or I don't particularly like it, and this is the reason why. Again, you know, don't take it personally. It's just my viewpoint. But it's very kind of, it's not a standard letter. I'm trying to make it personal. But I always try and finish on a kind of like positive and say, no, all the best with your writing, and you know, if you've got something in the future you think you want to send it to, please do. So I always finish on a kind of positive, because kind of writing itself as well, I know how much people put in to writing. So and I think when people do snide, sarcastic comments, one, it's kind of jealousy. They've probably never written anything in their lives anyway. And I just think it's rude and ignorant to do that. You know, you shouldn't be doing that. Although one guy who I kept saying, no, we don't. He kept saying that I'm funnier than Terry Pratchett. You get more jokes per page than Terry Pratchett. Now I like Terry Pratchett. I'm not a big fan, but one of our editors is a massive Terry Pratchett fan. So I said, will you do a 12-page analysis of this book? And I sent it to him. We don't do this for everything. And he still said he was funny, and he just wasn't listening. But I think he needed help in other areas. And it got to a stage where he was phoning me up every day. He then phoned me up on Boxing Day 8 times. And I just had to, we had to kind of change the number. We don't put the number on the thing anymore. But he was always having a breakdown. And that's kind of quite serious, isn't it? And he did really need help and support, but not from an independent publisher. Although one woman did, she sent a 400,000 word manuscript in. And the premise was it was based in Cairo 5,000 years ago. It was an Egyptian detective and inspector. And I thought, it started off quite interesting. But then she said, but he's disguised as an aubergine. So, you've got to be harsh, haven't you? When you send work in, the main character will probably can't be a vegetable. So that's my word of advice. If you've got any carrots, they've got some great stories. Keep them to yourself. But no, just be very, I think just got to be very professional. I realise that I spent, you know, hundreds of hours, you know, writing, so you've got to be decent. Well, I know you.
Speaking of author pride in their work, as an extension of that, when it then comes to marketing, looking to get published, Jake, for me, when an author is on social media, that's fantastic. I think that, you know, in order to build a relationship with readers, I think it's absolutely key in today's market, and I recommend that to anybody. If you are writing or you've got a book, and even before, try to build a good relationship with readers out there, and make sure that that's what it is. It's a relationship. You don't have a megaphone and you're just shouting to them, and you know, and it can be a cyber version of that. But I have found that sometimes I will follow an author on Twitter just because I was initially interested in the look of their book or what they've said. I've had an immediate direct message, and you all might have your ideas on direct message, but when the direct message says, "Hi, buy my book," and that's it, that puts me off. But forgetting that, when an author will just use every opportunity and all opportunities to just say, "Here's a link, buy it," and they don't do any talking, they don't do any engaging, how damaging is that? 'Cause I find it quite off-putting as a reader, and as a result, how much demand is there for consultants like you to try and offset that?
I think it's hugely challenging. If you imagine going and doing an event, an author event, look at the form change here. If you were doing an author event and all that you did was spend an hour saying, you need to buy this book, you need to buy this book, you need to buy this book, actually pretty much your entire audience is going to walk out, and quite rightly so. And actually what you're doing on Twitter is exactly the same. You need to be engaging with people, you need to be engaging people with the ideas behind your work, with the process behind your work, because a lot of people are fascinated in the process of writing. There's a huge amount of interest in it. There are reading groups out there, and there are specific Twitter reading groups that go on. So there is a big market there, but it's about knowing how to appropriately engage with them. And just shouting at somebody, telling them that they have to buy, actually isn't appropriate. It's never appropriate. In terms of what role there is for consultants, I think actually it's more than that. It's probably more a role for publishers themselves to provide almost an induction type document, because a lot of people aren't perhaps aware of the netiquette that goes behind social media. And I think if you can be a little bit aware of the types of things that it is appropriate to say, the types of ways that you can engage with different people, the ways that you can use direct messaging and not just say, buy my book. I think we've all been that way. You've instantly followed somebody and the first thing that they've done is send you a link to Amazon. It's like, well, why would I be interested in following you if that's all you're going to do? So I think, yeah, it's about really publishers making people more aware of how to do that. And I think that is happening more. I mean, Justin Somper does an awful lot of this kind of work, just so with his company. Authors are allowed to do it. So I think it is happening more and it needs to happen more.
This sounds random, but it'll make sense when I get to the end of my point. So, I don't know if anybody saw the job interview documentary that was on Tuesday night, and I think part of the trailer for that was, your CV is listed with mistakes. You know, if you are so professional and take so much pride in your work, why is it with mistakes? And I had a friend of mine who said, why does it matter? Stop being silly, stop being pernickety, it's just read the CV, if they're good enough, that's fine. My argument was, if you can't even be bothered to spell something or try to get somebody to make sure you spell something correctly, how much effort do you put in the product that you then provide people or the service that you provide people? So for that, with that in mind, Dee, how much work do you have to put into convincing people that just how important it is that accuracy is key?
Yeah, this is an uphill struggle I've had all my career, trying to convince people of that. I started off as a copywriter in an advertising agency, and people even then found the whole concept a bit strange. The idea that you should have an ad that's actually spelled properly and that doesn't write your Y-O-U-R and they mean Y-O-U apostrophe. People get really quite sarcastic about it sometimes. That's how I found people. And nowadays, I suppose I can say that when people come for copy editing, it's because they do recognise at least that there might be some merit in that. They wouldn't be coming to me otherwise. But people are always still very surprised at how much detail there is. We tend to do sample mini-edits so people can see what they're getting. And people are always a bit horrified. At first they see all the red, as we use track changes. They see all the red and they think, oh gosh, it must have been really awful. And it's not. It's just that as an editor, you go for consistency. And there tends to be quite a lot of things. They might use while in one place, but whilst in another. Silly things like that. But it does matter. When you read a professionally published book, you won't find that sort of inconsistency, or at least you know. I'm sure you wouldn't in any of Kevin's books, that's for sure. And you use things like, vocative commas are in there, and capitalisation is used correctly and not over much. And it all helps with the flow of the writing. That's what it's all about at the end of the day. It's engaging with the reader, and it's not letting anything get in the way of the story. And that's what copy editing is important for. Not in itself because one happens to be pedantic and pernickety, which I am, I confess that. but But it's all about people being able to engage with your story, with your words.
It's all about pace and rhythm, isn't it?
Mhm.
Stories.
Absolutely.
So, in terms of the YA market then, and anybody can jump in with an answer here, why do you think that it's growing in popularity? It really is a surging market at the minute. I mean, I'm 25 and I definitely read a lot of YA fiction. Why would you say that it's become so popular, and do you foresee that as a continuing thing? Perhaps Paul and Jim.
Yeah, I think for me, I do say this quite often, is that for me, one of the reasons I write young adult and fantasy is it's just pure escapism, isn't it? I just think we're constantly rinsed with something that is negative all the time. You know, you look around, it's on the news or it's on social media, just constant negativity. And, you know, I think with young adult, as an adult now, it's really nice to just go back to a simpler time, isn't it? When you were a young adult. Do you know what I mean? So, and just to be, you know, in a, whether it's a fantasy world or it's this world with things that are going on, you know, that it's going to have a good outcome, a positive outcome. Because we never know whether there's going to be a positive outcome if there's negative going on. You know, you look at the negative stuff in the news or the negative stuff around you and you think, God, is that actually going to be sorted out? Whereas reading young adult, you know, for me anyway, and a lot of people that I know are interested in that genre, it's that escapism and it's that hope kind of thing, without sounding a bit too cheesy.
Hearing from her.
I would almost say the opposite. Sorry. I think it's almost a clarification of what's going on in the world. There's so much experimentation happening in the young adult field. There's an awful lot of innovation that's happening. There's a lot of very ideas-based fiction going on. And I think that's something that young readers really do latch onto. And I think actually it's something that everyone does, which is why we're seeing this boom. Because it offers you a very different take on fiction. It's not stilted, it's not as much led by specific trends or genres. A lot of young adult fiction is genre busting, and it does take risks. And I think there isn't always hope. I mean, Kevin Brooks won the Carnegie Medal very controversially with his book, The Bunker Diaries. And the reason why it was so controversial was because there was absolutely no hope whatsoever at the end of that novel. Basically, the characters ended up getting eaten and were in a bunker in the middle of nowhere, and you didn't know who was keeping them captive or why they were being kept captive. But it kept you hooked right the way through. And I think there's that narrative thread, that narrative thrust. And that's something that YA fiction is doing incredibly well, but I think some other areas of the market just aren't doing.
So, on that note then, you know, YA is performing incredibly well compared to sort of other areas, but Kevin, your company is going from strength to strength constantly. I can't keep track of like the achievements that your company has been having recently, but I suppose it would be quite difficult to identify one or two trends in the market outside of YA, but how is it, or how would you say that you're managing to put your finger on what's working well? Because your front list, it varies massively. There's such a huge range of subjects on it.
I think it's because we've got 5 fantastic editors, and they've all got, we've got 5 brilliant editors who've got different reading tastes. They all read different things. They all love stories, all love words. And because I'm the first person to kind of read something, I say, I think there's something here. And then it goes around all the 5 editors and they read it, they read the full manuscript. And if every one of the editors thinks there's something in the story, I think we've virtually covered that. Not the whole of readership, but I think it's got a chance in the world of readers, because, you know, I think sometimes in publishing we forget the most important people in publishing are you, the readers. And so when the 5 editors that we've got say there's something here, I might not even like the story. I mean, one of our most successful books, our top editor, didn't like the story, but loved the way it was written. and love love the kind of the narrative art without getting too poncy about it. And that's the one we sold to Hollywood. So I think it's down to kind of our editors. And also, one, we never follow trends. I think you've got to follow your heart if you fall in love with a story. It's all about characters and its trials and tribulations and what they do. And it's experiences that we experience every day. And also, I have a huge issue with creative writing, or some creative writing schools. Because I can, when a manuscript comes in, I can tell within the first 5 sentences that they've got an MA in creative writing. Because the sentences have just been polished to within an inch of their lives. It's almost as though they've been bleached of all visceral nature. And I'm thinking, I won't swear, but just write what you feel. And I think there's a sense, and I think it's coming from academia, that they want to be like Tom McCarthy, or they want these kind of little... Someone said to me, and I nearly kind of killed them, it's nothing to do, publishing is nothing to do with stories. It's just what happens between one full stop and another full stop. And I just thought, oh my God, you can kind of get a computer to do that. In fact, one of our authors went over to MIT to talk about the creativity. And it said all these kind of world-leading bots, they'd found a 40-year-old mainframe, and they programmed it to write a poem. And it took them 3 weeks to write this kind of program, and it had written a poem. And they thought it was fantastic. And then David just said, yeah, but it's a shit poem. So you are the greatest IT minds in the world. And he said, he wasn't having a pop at them. He said, creativity is more than a process. It's, your heart, your soul, your experience, imagination. Because, writing is about creativity and imagination, period. It's not about someone telling you what to do and stuff. It's about your story and getting it down there. So I think that's why, and that's why I think independence, because everyone's getting so sick and tired of it, it's got to go through an agent. They polish it up and, are they going to get 500 grand from an editor? And then it's saying, well, we need this kind of particular story. And it's becoming homogenised, and then you just get this blancmange coming out of one end. And I think independence, they're saying, look, we just want to publish fantastic stories.
And for that reason, other than talking carrots, would your advice be to just write, don't doubt,
No.
or is just write it? If that's what you want to write, write it.
Yeah. Have faith in yourself, Just trust yourself. And if you've got a story, everyone might not like it, but you've got to do what you've got to do, and don't let anyone say, do it like this or like that. You've just got to write what you want to write.
Yeah. I did terrible in English at high school, and then I don't have an English degree. Never done a creative writing workshop.
I've done all of that, and I don't think
and everyone looks, when I said I was writing a book, everyone looked at me like I was stupid. Like literally would look like I was a dancer, ballerina at one point. So we're a tutor and like that. But, and everybody did look at me like I was silly. And the first book took me 18 months to write because I had no clue how to write. And I didn't even realise as I was writing, my friend read it, the first draft, which was terrible anyway. But said, "Oh, you're writing a lot of similes." Like, okay, what's a simile? Didn't have a clue what it was.
Right.
And then they said, "Oh, you're writing in third person." Okay, cool. Didn't really know what writing in third person was. So, and all through that process of writing that first book, I had to do online English tests because I didn't know what an indent was or anything. Obviously, that process, I've learned so much about how to write from the academic side of it, but I'm not influenced by a workshop in a classroom or you structure this like this, you structure this like this. I had to learn all that myself and make all the mistakes myself, which I prefer now. I mean, I have thought, since being published, I might go and do, because I have a degree in dance, I might go and do a degree in English. But then I thought, well, no, because I've done all right, and I think if I go and do a degree, I'm worried about being either institutionalised with it or losing that kind of organic kind of my imagination being kind of blocked with some stuff. Works for me. I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do because I am quite envious of people who are like you guys. I'm quite envious because I do really buzz off literature and writing and the whole academic side of it, apart from editing. But yeah, you're so right. It's a creative find the dark side of your brain, find the light side of your brain, right from the heart, no matter what it is. And if it's cliche, someone will tell you, and you'll know it's a cliche. And I always say, write a new cliche. I have a line in my first book, and my editor was really, really concerned about it. And this horrible woman's locked these children in a room with these vile insect spiders thing. And as she shuts the door, I really wanted a line that everybody would have heard of before, but not a cliche. So the line is, children should be heard and not seen. Which is, children should be seen and not heard is a massive cliche. My editor was buzzing over this line, and she was just like, you know, she put big stars around it and everything. It is a cliche, but it's a changed cliche, and it's not very nice, but...
I would recommend, speaking from my own personal experience, and at some point I will practice what I preach, but I had a good and a bad experience with my creative writing course, where, you know, I went to all the seminars and did all the final projects, and I got hugely sort of disheartened, because even though I was getting sort of firsts from one professor, there was another professor telling me that I wrote too English and that I should be more Irish, which basically meant don't sugar the pill, and if you want to write about something horrible, be as gory as you can. And I was 21 years old and thought, okay, so somebody's really criticised my work, it's terrible, and as a result I stopped, and I still need to pick it up, but you know, it's just at the beginning of my career of helping other people do it. So I would say, you know, if you will receive rejection, you will receive criticism, but don't let it completely stop you. Like, if that's your passion and that's what you want to do, then keep at it no matter what.
I think the ultimate arbiters of taste are the readers, and the ultimate gatekeeper should be the readers. But unfortunately, we're in an environment, and we're in a kind of academic environment now, so I'm not going to pop at UCLAN. But there are certain academics who run, you know, and these are kind of big creative writers, who have, you know, they've had, you know, half a poem published 30 years ago, and now the professors have big words and they're telling people how to do something. Hang on a minute. You know, what if you actually have published that's been successful, both critically and commercially? You know, how dare you tell someone that they can't write? And I think that's that. I'm not saying everywhere, but it's a worry for me that I'm seeing lots of writers who want to get, you know, want to be published authors who say, yeah, but so and so said this and so said that. I'm thinking, well, hang on a minute. You know, you've got to write what you've got to write. I'm going on a pet hate.
I found that the writing industry is more bitchy than the dance industry, and that the dance industry is shocking. But I find that the writing industry, the HarperCollins have a forum, and you can put your work on there, and people read it, they comment, you know, they'll rate it, and then you have to meet a certain score. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, you reach a certain score. Once you reach a certain score, a professional editor will edit your work, and then it gets sent to an agent's desk. I was on this site for 6 months, and I'd be in tears of some of the reviews, and it was just unjustified bitchiness. You know, it was just a constant bitching. You know, that was just only that way. I have had some good supportive people, but I have found that the writing industry is a lot bitchier than the dance industry, and that is really saying something.
And that's a lot to do with class as well. We've not even gone to class. I mean, I started off working for Headline many years. The guy who started it was the third son of the Earl of Dunamore, and I've never seen wealth like it, and it's just got even worse. The people who run publishing now and the big houses, it's not middle class, it's not upper middle class, it's kind of virtually aristocratic. And they only kind of, and the people that they're getting in, kind of as interns and that, are from kind of like mainly public schools, Oxbridge. And their life experiences and the books that they are reading are becoming narrower and narrower, which means that when they're commissioning work, it's from a very small life pool and reading pool, and that's what worries me as a kind of publisher now. And I think that's why independents are doing, because we don't give a toss about where you came from or what school you went to. Can you run?
I think the fantastic part of how the industry is going now, especially since inclusivity and diversity are such huge issues. I think the market is opening up, both in terms of people in class and ethnicity and all the others. I mean, I once got accused of being a privileged mummy's boy as well. Because I had a guest speaker on my blog, and they thought it was me, and they said, right, well you're a white mummy's boy from Oxford, and I said I'm a girl from Hull, like a fishing city, probably the poorest city here, and I'm working class through and through. Let's not, generalise, but I genuinely think it's opening up more and more, and definitely don't take sort of what's happened before as any kind of thing that can dishearten you. And I think now is a fantastic time to be a writer. It's a fantastic time to be a publisher, and you've got so many channels open to you. You've got so much opportunity, and I think it's getting better with the likes of independents like Kevin, crowdfunding the way Paul did his, and you've got people like Jake and Dee who are singing the praises and trying to help people as much as they can. So definitely pursue your passions. We've been speaking for about an hour, so I would ask one sort of small piece of advice from each of you before we take questions from the audience.
Read as much as you can and write as much as you can.
I hate that you said read as much as you can.
I didn't say that. No, I think, yeah. But then, if you're, doing PlayStation or whatever, it doesn't matter, does it? Well, that's my
Embarrassing. I would have said my advice, don't drink vodka when you write. Seriously, I've done it a few times and it's so counterproductive, it really is. Or just don't read it back before you
I think coming back to what has been said about reading as much as you can and concerns that raised, actually we read all of the time. Reading isn't just about decoding text, it's about reading situations that are around you. It's about being interested in the world, asking what if. These are the things that really engage us. These are the things that captivate us. You can do that if you can get that enthusiasm and that interest through your writing. You're halfway there.
Make time. Make time for your writing. It's the hardest thing. The older you get, the worse it gets. But if you're serious about it, at least, Kevin, I think, said an hour a day, didn't you? I think for some of us that's optimistic. Half an hour every day, that's the thing. If you get into the habit and you think, oh, well, half an hour's not going to be enough, I'm not going to be able to possibly get my brain into gear, but actually, again, like everything else, it's a habit and you can sort into it very quickly, and it's amazing how many words you can write in half an hour.
We need to pass the mics on to the audience and then anybody who has questions.
Yeah, can do. Anybody have a question? Do you want a microphone or are you comfortable?
No, my name is Mark. I'm kind of new to all this, so I'm learning a lot from you guys today. I was interested when Dee was saying about accuracy and making it technically accurate and a good story and all what you've been saying, but I then kind of thought about some of the massive books that are out there, and I thought of 50 Shades of Grey, and I thought, how did she get to the status that she's got? Because technically it's abysmal. The story's not even good. And surely they've written about porn for years, but she's achieved this stardom from a very bad book. So is this all about marketing for her? How has she achieved it?
Is the rumour correct that it was fan fiction?
It was fan fiction online, it was a massive following.
Yeah. I think do you know what, I just think this is only my opinion, I mean, people might disagree, but I just think she tapped into a lot of
sexual angst in the Midwest of America, because in the Midwest of America most of them were books were bought on Kindle, so there wasn't a jacket, and there was no, if you notice the jacket, there was no sex on the jacket, it was just a tie, wasn't it?
She just tapped into a lot of bored women's brains.
This is a massive generalisation, and I apologise that I stood down there from Hull, right? But I'm from Hull, and I, as I said, I grew up in a very working class, quite a rough estate. Okay, so the people that would be on a bus when I got on one would not generally be your readers or your publishers or anything like that, and there were people who were struggling, and I had my Kindle and I was reading, and sort of a middle-aged woman comes up to me and goes, so how's the 50 Shades of Grey book? That's what you're reading, right? And I turned to her and I said, why do you think I'm reading that? And she was like, popular. And I thought, that's great. So you immediately think that it's a 50 Shades of Grey because, as awful as it sounds, it was kind of the only book that was getting the attention of these sorts of people. And as awful as it sounds, but it did answer a lot of sort of
Surely there were
basic.
books like that out there before, because there's always been top shelf books, and surely the same kind of genre
But it was
description.
kind of the mayor of the fan fiction as well, and it was kind of, that drove a huge coaching horses into coaching horses, and it was like a follow-on. And there's, you know, in publishing there's a momentum thing, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger, didn't it? It just.
I think it's ridiculous. I think it's a ridiculous story. Although I did watch the film, and I thought, well, I actually thought the film was very well made. I thought it's quite classy. It's a lot classier than the book. But I've had this discussion before with people about the actual story and the actual role between Mr. Grey and whatever she's called. I can't remember her name. It's actually quite an intelligent thing to do, because when you watch Twilight, I mean, I'm not a massive fan of Twilight, but I do like it. And I like the relationships between people when I watch stuff. I do analyse relationships, and I did like the kind of dominant, submissive kind of relationships between those two people, which obviously she took from. And a lot of people are attracted to reading, watching, seeing the development of someone's going from submissive. Because there's a lot of irony between those two characters, because from what I gather, the roles do reverse. Do you know what I mean? It becomes questionable between those two characters. Actually, who is the dominant one in this? Who's controlling who? And I think that was attractive as it spiraled. Do you know what I mean? Initially, it was about, oh wow, it's sex, it's this, it's that, oh my husband would never do that, or my wife would never do that kind of thing. That was the initial attraction. But then actually on reading it, I mean, I think it would take up quite a bit of intelligence, but maybe I'm being too intellectual with this.
I don't think so. Because it is a controversial point of view. Like, I know a lot of people look at it and think, oh, it's trash. And I haven't read them. I'm not just saying that because I want myself to look better. I just haven't read them. So I'm only going from what people have said. But here's the question. If something, even if it's kind of smutty or whatever it was, if something has encouraged so many non-readers to read,
It's a good thing.
it can, I don't know, I just saw it as a case of, like, you know, people.
You got people who wouldn't normally go into a bookshop into a bookshop.
Yeah, and like my sister reads all sorts now. She wasn't reading before she read 50 Shades.
We
She
did-
read it, and now she's reading.
We did an author event in Bradford in Waterstones. It was Ben Myers and his Pig Iron, and he was there signing books of his book, which is literary fiction, which won all these awards and stuff like that. And there was about 24 dumpings of 50 Shades of Grey, and women were just piling in and buying it and buying it and buying it, and it was just an incredible phenomenon. To such an extent that kind of the estrogen overload was just... Anyway, my wife was on holiday, and I decided I was going to become a multi-millionaire, so I sent out a spoof press release to the bookseller and the Guardian that Blue Moose Books were going to publish the unauthorised biography of Christian Grey. Within 5 minutes, the phone was off the hook. I had a woman, the head of Simon & Schuster in America, from New York, talking about a multi-level platform, launch, films, stuff like that. They wanted to see the book. Nothing had been written. I got Ben to write it. Heather came back off holiday, read the first one, was going down to London on a train, reading it, and texting Ben, he does this, does that. And Ben wrote the first 3 chapters, and we were going to become gazillionaires. And then Random House found out about it. And I got an email, I got a letter from the head of legal in Random House in New York saying, if you persist, we will bankrupt you. And then I got an email from Random House in London saying, if you persist, we'll bankrupt you. So I phoned a friend of mine from HarperCollins and said, can we do this? And he said, it might be called passing off, which is kind of a bit of pleasure, but it's a bit of a grey area. But I know the 50 Shades, I forget what she's called now, I know her agent, I'll ring her up, and if we give her 15%, she might buy into the autobiography, unauthorised biography, sorry. So he phoned her up, and then he phoned me back 10 minutes later and said, she's going to sue you as well. And I had to write to each of them and saying that Blue Moose would desist in this activity. And that was about the amount of money that it was generating. They thought, holy Jeebus, there's this, who's this Northern Oik? Thinks he can have some of that. And I'll tell you, if you try and get into their kind of brand, they came down on it. And we remortgaged our house to start with because I thought, I can't tell the lads, they've got nowhere. I went with a punt and it didn't win. But it just showed that I just thought, geez.
I suppose in terms of the message that it gives to writers, like you, I suppose, I don't know if it was a one-off, but like Kevin said, it was a phenomenon, and I don't think it's a model to press and apply onto what else tends to happen in the industry. I think she knew what she was doing and it worked for her, but I don't think that's generally what's going to happen. Unless you really fancy writing some erotica.
It was published online in America, and this has only just come out now, that the two people who published it initially in America have just won multi-million pound lawsuit against her and Random House. Because they published it initially, and there was a contract, and Random House tried to kind of cover it up. But they made so many hundreds of millions of it. Sorry, I'm taking that. Any more?
Yeah, can I ask a more practical question? You talk about writing all the time. When you write, I'm sure it's for you. When you have a story to tell, you just can't get the words out fast enough. You just pen won't go that quick enough, you can't type that quick enough. But I'm just wondering, can you get the quality by disciplining yourself to write an hour a day or even half an hour a day? When one day you just can't stop and another day...
I don't think anybody should restrict themselves to... Like, I'm
get it
kind
down.
Yeah, if you feel like you want to write for 3 hours and get it all out, do that. If the next day you really can't pick up the pen, then don't impress on yourself, right, okay, well I committed myself to so I really had better do this. If you're just not feeling it, whatever you're going to put down on the page, it's not going to be you, it's not going to be your story, it's just going to be stilted and not worth it. So, and also, what I have found though, and through all sort of my creative writing that I've done in the past, and the classes and the seminars and everything I did, there was such a massive range of people. And I had one friend who had Excel spreadsheets, she had weekly timetables, and she knew what she was writing, and she knew down to the last letter how much she was writing a day, and she structured it all perfectly. And yet there was other friends of mine who just went with the flow, and they both did well, and they both got what they wanted done. But I genuinely think it's based on your personality, and the second something stops feeling natural to you, then that's not the way to go, personally. But that's my view on it.
I absolutely agree. I think it's so important. Everybody's different. I mean, we can all sit down here and give advice, can't we? We all say, well, we find this works for us, or we found a lot of people like that particular advice. But essentially, you're the writer, and it's your story that you're writing, and you've got to find a way that works best for you. And you can be a planner or a pantser, as they say. Whatever, you can write in sort of 3 or 4 hour dashes and then not touch it again for a week. You know, whatever, it's what works for you. That's important.
I like the way you asked the question, the way you said, you know, what if you just can't get the words out quick enough? In that, my process, I do it in drafts, obviously, but my first draft, I don't read anything back that you've written. I literally just write. And the first book, I stopped at 120,000 words. It was published at 71, so I lost 50,000 words of absolute rubbish. Because you just go, full of spelling mistakes, really bad errors, you know, like a 5-year-old's written it. Get to the end of that, have a break, go back to the start. I think, you know, it sounds like, are you writing anything at the minute, or have you started writing something, or you...
No, it's just, when I think about a story, the characters, they just roll over, don't they?
Yeah.
And then you don't know what's coming, but you just keep writing it, and then the next bit comes, and then the next bit comes. But I wondered if there would be any mileage in saying, like, setting a time scale, so that you could perhaps trigger your brain. I don't know if you could. So that,
again, I think it's a personal thing, but try it. As I say, try it. It's all trial and error. Give that a shot. Give it a try. Give it a shot for a week, 2, 3. If that works for you, great. If you find it becomes a hindrance, it doesn't work for you.
I think the story's a trigger.
Yeah.
You want to get the story down.
it's just I did that for housework, I'd never do any.
Don't do any housework.
Don't do any housework.
Don't do any housework.
Yeah, forget, just leave the housework.
You're only pushing dead relatives around anyway, aren't you? What's your story?
That's so
Sorry,
Bro.
How important is it for an unpublished author to have their own website when they're making submissions to publishers and agents?
Personally, it doesn't matter at all.
Doesn't matter.
No. For me, if you know, I would want you as a writer to spend all your energies into writing the story. Once we say we're going to publish your book, then you can put up a website and you can promote it that way. But we've never sold a book on a tweet, really.
Yeah.
It's kind of put all your energies into writing first and foremost, and then the other things, the publisher or an agent will help you with other things. But first and foremost, just worry about your book, your story.
What would you find, Jake, that kind of makes the audience warm to a person? Because like Kevin said, with a website, I've read websites of authors who've put, I'm the next so-and-so writer. It's like, how do you know? Like, you don't know yet. So you've got to be careful anyway that you're making a lot of statements that aren't necessarily true. But yeah, what do you think?
It's a difficult one. I think, you do have to be careful, but on the other hand, I think readers generally are looking for recommendations. My background was in libraries, and there was a piece of research done that showed that only around about 5% of people going into libraries actually have a very specific idea of what it is that they're looking for. So there is a real role in trying to let people know what it is that your work is about, and how they can sort of have a taster of that, I suppose. I think the key is try not to be too slick, because actually it's a slick presentation isn't necessarily going to reach out to people. It's about the connection.
Don't feel very personal, really.
Yeah.
Somebody comes across as extremely suave and perfect, and I just think, well, you're not real, because nobody's perfect. And I think it's about finding that balance. If you want potential readers to know you and know who you are and get a sense of who you are, then I think it's a good thing. Maybe a blog or something where you really get your personality across. But the second you start using it as simply a tool to sell yourself, that's fine when you've got a book, but if you're trying to find line.
And despite the hundreds of millions that kind of publishers spend on marketing and sales and everything else, the best way to sell a book is word of mouth. Still.
And actually,
And recommendations from friends and libraries.
yeah, the most effective thing is always reader recommendations.
Yeah.
Other readers talking to other readers. If you can get that happening, that's when things start to take off. That's what works for 50 Shades of Grey.
Hello. Paul, it's amazing that you being a dancer and then you converse it to become a writer. What feelings or senses has writing given you that you just haven't experienced before?
Okay, I answered a similar question in a magazine interview that I did, and one of the amazing things, because I choreograph professionally and you're always hindered by budget, so I will choreograph a contemporary piece for, I don't know, the Tate. I did a contemporary piece at the Tate, and it was based on Auguste Rodin's sculpture of the Thinker, and I've referenced this before. When we was really hindered by budget, we had like £1,500 to spend on body paint, set, pay the dancer, pay me. We had to pay money for the lighting, stuff like that, and it was very, very, very tight. But then, writing a scene in a book, your budget is endless. So you can have what you want. Do you know what I mean? And it's such a fantastic. I mean, it's hard to write like a big fantastical scene. Like in the second book, there's a scene with these mermaids, and as they awaken from the ground, their necks snap, their heads twist. I mean, the budget that would be needed for that, is unreal. And if I wanted to choreograph a contemporary piece that was mermaids with snapping necks, I'm not really going to get that unless I've got robotic mermaids. So those kind of senses, to go from a limited budget on a stage to writing it, and personally, quite selfishly as well, when you're visualising that in your head, it's almost like, for me, it's like I've choreographed it and it's been on stage and it's been watched. Do you know what I mean? And hopefully the reader will read it and have experienced, because what I write is quite cinematic anyway, you know, and that's from my influence from like film and TV and PlayStations and stuff like that. But those are the kind of, I get really, really, really excited and buzzed when I've just created something that I know I can't afford to create in real life. That's amazing. I mean, I've worked in TV and stuff like that, and sometimes the budget's great, but it's never to that extent of when you can visualise it as though it was in a film. Do you know what I mean? So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think I'm very interested in motivating yourself by imagining the exhilaration.
Okay.
A different kind of exhilaration. You're obviously a very creative person.
Yeah.
But you found a different avenue and you've actually closed it. You've actually produced something that is so different. I know you're explaining really interestingly how they're very linked.
Yeah.
But also, it's a completely different medium. You're choosing written words.
Yeah.
Whereas you're obviously very physical, especially with
Visual.
So how's that made you feel as a person in how you deal with your life and how you just express yourself as a person? Has that changed because you now found this different medium?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so now that I'm published, now that I write, it has changed the way I choreograph, and it has also changed the way it's a bigger influence on when I'm choreographing something. Maybe more. I've always been quite a deep choreographer anyway, so if I choreograph contemporary works, I do a lot of research, and there's a huge process that goes behind it that most people would never even know happened prior. And I mean, that kind of is the same as writing, you know, people would read it and they wouldn't actually sit and go, oh, how did you process that kind of thing? My brain is a lot more relaxed because I feel that a lot of stuff has come out of my brain. Because I'm writing fantasy, it's coming out, you know, there's metaphor and everything. So, and it kind of is a bit like therapy, you know. I think that writing is more intense than choreographing, and the finished product, there's more of me in it than there would be in a choreographed piece, because that's like a small element. Whereas in an entire book, you know, there's so much personal stuff. The death of my mum at the beginning of the year really influenced my second book. It became darker, the story shifted, I added new characters I'd never planned on adding before. They weren't even in the whole series is written, plotted, but it's completely changed. I'm dreading writing the third book because I don't know, oh God, just completely changed, you know. So I think writing in my genre, and I think, well, writing in any genre, it's so deeply personal, however you look at it. And when you read back, it's so cathartic by the end of it. You've released so much tension, stress, any anxiety that you might feel, anything that you hated, you might have learned to love. Anything you've loved, you might learn to hate. You know, it is very different. Yeah? Okay, you're welcome.
I've kind of a technical question. So I've got an idea for a story, and I've got an outline for an entire novel actually. And there are two specific scenes in this story that involve a pop song, or a separate pop song in each scene. And I was planning to quote a couple of lines from the pop song so that people would know that it was that pop song, and then I did a Google search and it was a bit like, maybe that's not possible. Should I just completely scrap that idea and just...
No, you
because
can do
those
it.
pieces, those songs kind of, they're really tied for me into what I'm trying to convey emotionally in those two scenes. The songs convey quite a bit of that, and it gives the scene the atmosphere that I want to give it, which I don't think I'd get if I was just trying to describe a piece of music that was playing in that scene, if you get what I mean. So
you just get permission.
You just get permission. Yeah.
So it is possible
It's possible.
to do.
There are books out there that do that, and it is a good.
we're publishing a book in September called The Handsworth Times, and it's about the riots in 1981 in Birmingham. And the soundtrack to the book is The Handsworth Revolution by Steel Pulse. And we've used about 10 lines from the song. So we just wrote to Steel Pulse, the publishing company, and they've given us permission, and they're not charging us a penny because they like what we're doing. Other companies might be different, but you can do it, but you just need permission. Otherwise, you get sued by.
So
but you can get permission.
Stick it in for the draft, and then try and get permission if it comes to the point that it's going to be published.
It's the music publishing. But they'll have an agent and they'll put you onto the rights. Usually the publisher will have a rights and permissions person and you speak to them and they'll say yay or nay or how much.
Don't worry about it until you finished it. I used a pot of cream, I called it Sudocrem, and I knew that there would be some kind of issue, so I just called it Sudocrem. And thought, I'll worry about that later, and then at the end it was like, well, can we use this? Yeah, actually it's fine. You know, so don't, because you're kind of hindering yourself there, don't just, because at the end of the day, you know, your manuscript is still your own, and you write what you want, do you know what I mean? And then once you get to the end, you know, then you start, don't worry about stuff.
Okay. Thank you.
Another question about copyright. This is submitted online. It says, how do you protect your stories when sharing them online with other budding authors in terms of copyright and ownership over your work?
Don't. No, all you can do is, the easiest way is that if you've written a story, you can't copyright an idea. You can, if you then flesh that idea out into a story, then all you do is you can date your story, like just write a synopsis, and then send it to yourself or send it to a bank manager. And if you've got the date on it, and that's your idea, and that's when you start it. So if anyone nicks it, you can say, look, you know, this is my story. And so that's an easy way to do it. But I wouldn't share ideas and stuff online, really, because people are
every time you write something, it is actually copyright. And you don't have to go through any process to register it as copyright. People sometimes think it's automatically copyright to you, but that doesn't stop anybody.
I've got a question for Kevin, just about publishing work. So is there more of a trend towards publishing longer pieces and full-on novels, or do you reckon there's space in the market for anthologies of short stories and things like that?
I think short stories used to be kind of a bit of a no-no, but since I think the Times short story, that's £40,000, and that's kind of raised the level of kind of short stories and novellas. And Julian Barnes won the Man Booker 2 years ago with what was a novella. So short stories, there aren't too many of the bigger publishers who do short stories, but there are lots of independents who do short stories, like Salt and Comma and people like that.
Would they publish them as a single book, or do you think the
Not really, no, there
should
shouldn't be no anthologies. Salt do an anthology of short stories.
With other authors, not like, so me as an author, I could write a certain amount of short stories and publish them as my work, or do you think it's easier to do it as a group of authors?
If it was a specific genre, there are kind of like, say, science fiction or crime or whatever, they will have a crime anthology of kind of like new writers. Those are published. But short stories are becoming more and more popular. But it's still a very, very small part of the market.
Yeah, and if you are interested in writing a single authored collection of short stories, then the best advice is to go for competitions and anthologies that are sort of genre based, so that you're building up that readership, you're building up an established reputation that you can go to a publisher with, and then you've got something tangible that shows that you are viable.
Just on that note, there's leaflets at the front that Dee's provided about a short story competition.
Yeah. It's my local writers' circle. We hold a national short story competition every year, and this year the theme is toxic. Now the deadline has actually been extended to August the 10th. When we printed those leaflets, we've been a bit optimistic. It's July 31st, but you've actually got another 10 days after that. So yeah, pick up a leaflet, and there are cash prizes, and you get published in an anthology that we produce of our circles, our members' work as well.
Also consider magazines and things like that as an outlet as well. There's two. I'll pick back and then you.
If you receive sort of feedback from, helpful feedback from an agent, is it wise to sort of change
Personally, I'd stick to your own story and not listen to what agents say, because agents think about their thought process is, I want to sell your work for as much money as possible, and at the moment it's crime. We published a book, there's a guy called Ben Myers, and he was published by Macmillan, Picador, and his second book was Pig Iron, and they didn't want to publish it because they said who would be interested in a working class character from a small northern town, and that was Durham. So we published it, and then it won loads of awards. So I wouldn't listen, you've got to believe in your own story, I think. But if they're offering you, vast sums of money, then...
Yeah. I think it depends sometimes when you get, if that's the first feedback you've had, professional feedback, and if it sort of chimes with your own sort of half-hidden thoughts that maybe you've not quite allowed daylight to get into, and you sort of think, oh, you might have a point there, then I think it's worth considering, rather than automatically thinking, no, I'm going to stick with exactly what I've got. But there are an awful lot of agents out there. And I did hear a horror story once. I was at Harrogate a couple of years ago, and I was talking to a lady who was thrilled because she got an agent. But she was a year on, and the agent was still asking for more and more changes. A year on, hadn't even got to trying to sell it to publishers at that stage. And I think at that point I would be seriously concerned with thinking about changing my agent.
Actually, my question is very similar to that one, which is at what point do you start sharing the work? Would you be advised to kind of wait till you get the whole story out and then try and show it to, like you did a friend or agents or publishers, or during the development of the story, you think, well, I'll show this to my friend and see how they're going. So at what point would you feel comfortable with the particular audience in this question to be able to share that piece of work with somebody else?
I think it definitely needs to be the final edit before you start going to an agent. I never made the mistake of sending something that was not finished, and that's because I'd researched the same question basically I'd asked. So it needs to be finished. So you've got your finished product before you go to an agent. Because the worst thing that could happen is if you're halfway through a manuscript and that first half is quite polished, and the agent says, right, okay, send me the second half, and you've not done it. If you email them and say, oh, I've not done it yet, you're done. Do you know what I mean?
Well, if you're sort of just still thinking about the story and all sorts of things, then would you kind of show it to a friend or other readers and go, not particularly wanting to change it enormously, but sort of get a direction and a feel for it, but how to develop it, or do you advise against that?
No, I mean it depends. I mean, if you've got friends that are, see the problem is with friends as well is that they're not always subjective. So. I mean, my mum read me first manuscript. She was like, oh my god, it's amazing.
Oh good, you'd hope so.
Yeah. Why was it amazing, Mum? Because I can't believe you've written that. Thank you. Do you know what I mean? So, and my beautiful mother, she read it and she loved it. She pulled out a few spelling mistakes. I'd written Y-O-U-R. But what I then did was, again, I used social media and I just put a status on my Facebook and I said, right, okay, because we all have friends that we don't actually know, we just accept it for selling purposes. So I put a status on when I finished my first manuscript, my first draft rather, and said, right, I'm looking for people that I don't really know that well, that I can email to. And I did get 5 random people, and I was then. It comes back to this copyright thing actually. If you were to send it via email, if you sent it on an email, the email's dated. So you could actually send your manuscript to somebody else's email and they can't do anything with it because it was dated when you sent it. Therefore it's copyrighted. Do you know what I mean? So I got 5 random people that I didn't really know, both sexes, they had different tastes. And I also asked for people that was not into young adult fantasy fiction as well, because I wanted an opinion on it, and someone that didn't like or didn't normally read fantasy fiction. And everyone came back with some really good feedback, and I did use some of the feedback. And some people said, oh, this is a cliche, that's a cliche, I think we should change it. But in answer to your question before about the argument of whether we should take the agent's advice and stuff, sit back, don't just take it straight away. Sit back and 9 times out of 10, if you're really passionate about your work, you won't change it if you don't want to change it. Or you will if you will agree. Do you know?
Absolutely.
So you've got to be subjective with the subjective opinion, if that makes any sense at all.
But the agent's ultimate role is to when there's no promise of the rest of it coming anytime soon. I mean, like the problem with like agents and publishers and stuff like that is, you know, it is an incredibly large market, but there's more and more writers coming out, and I think, especially from a publisher's point of view, and likely from an agent's point of view, is they don't have a lot of time. We don't have a lot of time. Workload's huge, and I'm not sure how many agents would necessarily sit down and go, right, well, this idea is good, but this and that. They might, but they might not always have that much time when their ultimate goal is to have a manuscript given to them and then sell it on to publishers. So I'd agree with Paul, your best bet is to share it with friends, share it with people whose opinion you want and opinion you trust, and I'd definitely encourage that, because a second and third pair of eyes is always brilliant.
Which comes down to the bravery as well. It's very, very, very difficult to when you don't know people, to read your heart and soul. It's very difficult. It's not quite as difficult as sending that final edit ready to go to print, because I cry. Literally like this. Can't do it. No, I'll have to go and have a brew, some toast, Smirnoff.
Just to sort of say as well, around editorial consultancies, like ours, I'm sure there's lots out there, that will critique just a certain section. So if you've written, like, say, the first 15,000 words, we'd look at that, and if you had a synopsis and you said, well, I see it developing this way and that, we'd advise on that too. And sometimes that can be, depends, you know, if you're comfortable sending it out to people, strangers on Facebook virtually, then that's great. But if you want to send it somewhere where you know that it's professional and that, you know, they're going to delete it after so many months or whatever, then, you know, maybe try that route. And that way as well, you can be fairly sure that people who are commenting on it are professional and they're not, you know, like your mum or your friend who might really be keen on keeping your friendship going, your relationship, rather than actually giving you some positive feedback.
Yeah, if you've got the budget, if you've got the spare money.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's not that expensive.
No, the editor that I got, I did save up for like 2 months, because it was like £300–400 just to let go of, just for to you know, to edit it, you know. Again, it's like, but so it's cheaper. Now I won't pay anyone to edit. I don't need to, because I know some writers get involved in people who are writers, or maybe amateur editors, or that's just me anyway. Because I don't want to pay anybody to do it. That's me being a bit stingy, because I've got things to buy at ASOS, so I don't really want to buy. Sorry.
You and then you.
I enjoy writing plays. I've had one performed already, and there's another being performed next week. But I've also written one that is very, very close to a television series that was on about a decade ago. How close can I go to have it performed? The names are different, the plot is different, but it will be recognised as this television series. I mean, am I allowed to have that?
If that's, as long as that's not the intention, like your intention isn't to put a play out there that is.
Oh no, I mean, I just enjoyed the series so much, and I really enjoyed writing the play, but I'm a little bit concerned that I might be
considered like fan fiction, wouldn't it?
Right.
And if it's a different plot, then.
And if it's 10 years ago.
I mean, the similarities will be evident when it's put out.
Well, there's only 7 stories in the world, so every book's similar to something else.
It's not outrageous.
I would say.
Plagiarism. I wouldn't worry too much about that. Like, I think, you know, it's got its own plot. It's not going to look like shameless copying.
I mean, I've altered it.
You're not Jeffrey Archer, so you're all right.
I wrote it about 10 years ago. I fitted it to the people who I know are going to be put up. I'm in the drama group myself, so I fitted it to the actors that are going to be doing it. So it's altered from the first initial draft, but I'm still a little bit wary.
Okay. Try it.
Yeah.
You won't know till you try it.
It's something that works.
Get a letter from Random House in New York. Start worrying.
There's one in the middle.
Hi, my name's Claire, and I'm starting my publishing MA this September. This question's more specifically for Kevin, but anyone is free to answer. What kind of like qualities and traits
look for people going into the publishing industry so they would stand out?
Passion, energy, commitment, desire, hard work for nothing. Passion, energy, and a love of words, really. And a love of kind of the industry, because it is hard work, and there's not a lot of money in it, even, So, passion, energy, hard work, hard work.
I've been working in the publishing industry about 2 years, but before that, after I graduated, it took me about 2 years before I got my first paid job. And it's one of those things where everyone's got degrees and it's such a popular industry to go into. The idea is you have to make yourself stand out, and how you make yourself stand out is, like Kevin said, passion and determination. But what does that translate to? You can write that you're passionate and dedicated on your CV, but so will the other 300 people. So my advice and what I did all the way through doing this was get evidence. If you say you're determined and you're passionate, how can you show that? For instance, I was dedicated and passionate about getting a job in publishing and editorial, but I didn't have much money. I just had a part-time job. I was from Holland, it's up in the north, and it's not really anywhere that I could have gone that didn't cost me hundreds of pounds. So I had to find a way to get editorial and publishing experience without me having to pay hundreds of pounds to go down to London. So thinking outside the box is key. So if you don't have a lot of time or a lot of money to go somewhere, think about what's around you that could be to do with editorial and publishing, but isn't necessarily a publishing house. So I became the editor of a basketball magazine, so there was a National League team in Hull, and they needed volunteers to help create this magazine. So I interviewed the players, I put the magazine together on InDesign, I wrote the match reports, I did everything, and it was pure editorial, but it was for a basketball team. Now you wouldn't, in a million years, really have a thought that you could have imagined that. Think outside the box, take every opportunity you can to get anything that if it's marketing you're interested in, production, if it's editorial, try and think creatively about how you can show that passion, and don't necessarily think that you're restricted by location or anything like that. And so then when it comes to writing your CV and applying for that job, you have concrete evidence. You've either got figures, or you've got names, or you've got places, you've got proof that you've done something and that you act on your passion. We can all be passionate, we can all say we're passionate, but unless you've got any evidence for it, you just look like the same as all these other people. So try and gather evidence for it. Get out there, network like crazy, meet people, talk to people online, but just at the end of the day, make sure that when you come to applying for a job, you can prove your passion, your dedication, and I promise you that will put you head and shoulders above other people who really like the glamorous idea of working in publishing. But
don't listen to me, listen to stuff.
It worked for me, but yeah, that's all.
I think that's the same, to be honest, in almost every industry, isn't it, when you're looking for a job. It is very easy to say, I'm passionate about it, I'm enthusiastic about it, but that, you kind of take that as read to, if they're replying, then you'd rather hope that they are in the first place, but having the evidence to back them, that's crucial.
Yeah.
I completely agree with what Stephanie said.
I think that absolutely is the background to any job, and actually you can go through a person's specification, you can just write, I am dedicated, I can work as an individual, I can work as a team, but you're not actually showing that. If you can demonstrate it, that's what is going to make a difference and get you shortlisted and get you an interview.
I mean, it's only the same, like Paul was saying, he didn't want to use a cliche. You think that you're working in HR in a company, or you're used to seeing CVs. You know, it's 3 o'clock on a Thursday, all I want to do is go home, I'm tired, I've had a long week, I've got a massive pile of CVs in front of me, and I've just read the 40th CV saying, I'm passionate and I'm hard-working. Well, fantastic, but so is everyone else, like they say they are. But if you say, I'm passionate and I'm hard-working, I network regularly, I've been to this event, I've done this event, or I've done this, or I've done this project, all off my own back. If it's voluntary, even better. If it's paid, fantastic. But I'm going to be looking at that and thinking, oh, she's good, we'll get her for an interview over somebody else who hasn't done that kind of thing. And if you take an MA, I made the mistake actually. I learned from my mistakes in that I didn't get the experience while I was in university. I was complacent. I thought everything that I need to do, I'll do it after I graduate. But do it while you're there, and that's when things like that, finding a local place that you can do work with while you're studying. In Hull, the neighbouring town is Hessel, and I thought, they have a town community newsletter. Literally, they just send it out to their residents 3 times a year. And I emailed them. It's the first thing I did after I graduated. I emailed them and said, I'm just taking a proofreading course. Can I proofread your newsletter for free? It took an hour or 2 out of my year, out of every 3 months or something like that. But I got my name in that newsletter, and I had copies of the newsletter as proof when I went to an interview, saying, this is what I do, I'm passionate, and I'm willing to do this, and I'm willing to find ways of doing it, even when there's restrictions. So yeah, just back it up with evidence and get involved as you can, and upload the SYP, come to SYP events, lots of them, because you'll meet publishers who will be able to give you advice. Like you'll meet publishers who will be able to tell you about vacancies at some point down the road. So yeah, get involved.
On the back of that as well is I think there's a great deal to be said about just being yourself and having personality and not, I mean, like, publisher. I would think to myself, okay, publishing house is going to, if I was to be really stereotypical, but okay, it's going to be proper like stern and actually he's got a good sense of humour. He's really witty. Like, I'm an author, but like I do gym selfies and like go out partying with my friends and do just normal stuff, and I relay that personality constantly all the time. To really think about be yourself, and because I think a lot of people sometimes it can be off-putting, can't it? You think, oh, where's the personality? Or they're not being real with me. They're not being kind of honest. So think about that as well. That's a big thing for me anyway. I buzz off people if they're showing the personality or they're showing, who they really are, not trying to be kind of like one way in accordance with what they think how they should be type of thing.
And you will do a lot of your own research as part of your MA anyway, but it is vital that you know the industry. And I know that sounds, again, like a cliche, but you'd be surprised how many people would go into an interview and they'd say, tell me what trends there are, talk about some influencers, talk about a marketing campaign that's particularly impressed you recently, talk about something that's going on in the industry, and some people get caught off guard and they stutter and they can't say anything. But if you have a lot of things to say that shows that you're keeping up with the industry, and publishing is one of the fastest moving industries, you can barely keep up with it. Follow people like Jake online and show that you know who the movers and shakers are, show that you know the trends, show that you know what's going on, so that you can adapt to them when you're part of that company, because the company needs an asset who will help them adapt to the market. And if you can go there and say, well, I know what's going on, and I know how I can help you achieve it, then you're going to be instantly more attractive candidate than other people. Yeah. I could go on for a long time. Honestly, I could, so it might be worth chatting to me afterwards.
Can I add creative thinking? Sorry, I'm the course leader for a master's in thinking. I'm kind of responsible for a lot of things. This is actually an assignment for the students. They have to organise a public-facing event. They will do that as part of the master's in publishing. I think they have to gain the experience for real. That is the only way they're going to learn how to do it the hard way. There are mistakes here. I am from the north, and I've always been a northerner, passionate northerner. So how is it possible that I was responsible for Harry Potter, because I was, and setting up Piccadilly and Oxford Street and all the rest of it, just because I never, ever gave up, never, ever said, somebody said to me, you can't do that because you're a north. I just went, no. But I'll find a way around it. Started on the And then I started there and thought, okay, I'm not getting anywhere, it's too small a branch. Worse than there is a place in Manchester, okay, I'll commute. I don't care if it costs me money, I'm commuting. Did that, and from there went on to Waterstone's head office. Didn't really want to move down fully, so kind of lived there 4 days a week and then commuted back to the north, where I had a husband. So, you know, nothing is impossible, is what I'm trying to say. You know, when I was a buyer, I was responsible for buying everyone's books, children's books actually, for a long time, at head office. And then I just thought, okay, at the end of Harry Potter, I don't know what I'm going to do next, I'm bored. So my husband was here already, and I was like, why is there no publishing courses in the north? Why? You know, why is that? That's not right. So they kind of said, okay, you do it. So everybody told me I couldn't do this. Everybody in the industry said I was stupid to set up a publishing course in the north. Seriously.
It kind of echoes what I want to do with the Society of Young Publishers. I want a publishing community in the north. And at the minute, in terms of networking and things like that, it's just non-existent. And there's some of the best publishers, I think, in the north, Kevin included. And there needs to be a community. And echoing what you said, you've brought a publishing event into the north, and I want a real community to it, and that's my next goal. And it's not going to be easy, and it's not all going to be plain sailing, but that's ultimately my goal. So when I sit here and say, come to the SYP, I literally gained nothing from it except trying to build a community. So just network, meet people, and take advantage of, you know, the growing sort of enthusiasm for publishing that there is in the north.
They also told me that when I was, because I was a buyer, that once I'd left being a buyer, no one would want to be my friend anymore because they were only a buyer, like a friend, because I was a buyer. I was like their books, so no one would be still friends with me. We're not that shallow. So I've still kept all my friends. You'd be really surprised at who will come up north very gradually for nothing. You know, they do want to engage. They don't like the fact that a lot of them are based in London and learning it. They'd rather be up here and have a nicer life. So anything is possible is what I'm trying to say. Never ever let somebody say, no, you can't do it, and then just go like you cry in the corner. Never ever do that. Just keep on going.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Any more questions?
How important do you feel symbolism or icons are in terms of, not in particular, young adult, for example, Harry Potter, lightning bolt scar, things like that, which make it, you know, you can not build an image on, but it's like, you know, like you say you need to sum up your story in 10 words. Do you also need to say, something talk in a single image, for example?
When you say a symbol or an image, is that a literal symbol or is it
like
a literary?
Or it doesn't need to, you know, maybe it could be, or like say 50 Shades is the tie. It's something that you say, you know, like such and such book, in your head there's this image of whatever it is.
I think it's a good idea as long as it's not. Sometimes it's blatant.
Yeah, it needs to be forced and it should be
Exactly. It's got to feel natural.
It's a generic story. Yeah. If it comes out automatically, great. But if you try to contrive it, to force it onto it, then it's a marketing tool, and it won't work because it's not got your story at its heart.
It'll be seen for what it is, which is a marketing tool rather than a part of the story.
But it depends if it's come naturally and it doesn't feel shoehorned in. And I think it does have to be subtle. I think it's a bit. They do it in cinema. They did it in. Do you remember Tom Hanks's Castaway? There's that image that always shows up on the boxes and things like that, and it's symbolism and all the rest of it. But I didn't notice that until I took a film module and they pointed it out. But it has like an effect on your perception question how you think about it, but if it was really blatant and in my face and felt forced, then that would immediately put me off. So just, I wouldn't say shy away from it completely, but just be careful, like Kevin said, it might
Yeah,
be
because I was worried about whether that was seen as a sort of no-no because of that perception, or whether, you know, how it tends to go down.
Yeah. It does work for some, like the Hunger Games. That would not work. Like as soon as you think of the Hunger Games, you think of that, that image that is there. It's almost like it's logoed, isn't it? It's, but then, you know, like you say, if it's not relevant, it's not important. There isn't. I don't have any kind of same, like both the first and second ones are completely different covers. There isn't the same kind of symbol anywhere or the same image. You know, one is of an earth with fire and water, and the other is of the second book is of a crown. You know, so they're completely different. So it isn't like a generic thing going through it. But then I had toyed with it. I had thought about it. Well, maybe it has to be this, but sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't. You just have to be careful with that.
I think there's a difference between doing it in a literary style and doing it in design style, because then when it comes to publishing, you know, you will have a design team or an illustrator that's assigned to it, and they might not necessarily use it, or it might not work, or for whatever reason it might not come about. And for that reason, if you submitted your manuscript and said the front cover must have this symbol on, I think you might come across a little bit of difficulty there. If you did it as kind of like a literary tool, as I said, if it's subtle and it works, then that's your work, isn't it? I suppose it depends on where you want to look at it. Just be careful. If it's too blatant.
Yeah, I think just allow it to happen naturally.
Yeah.
It's going to happen, allow it to happen naturally, but don't put any real concerted thought into trying to make that happen.
So the story might get shaped around it, rather than the story going naturally. If you go, right, well, at some point I have to get a tie into the scene, so it might affect how you write. But as Jake said, it comes naturally.
Story first, everything else last.
Yeah.
Story. Do all that later. Think about like pencil cases and stuff.
Yeah, lampshades.
Great lampshades.
Okay, one last question.
Just a quick question. Hello, everybody. Some publishing companies, when you read them, it says that ideas are welcome, which sounds a bit scary, really, as there's no copyright on ideas. So, would you suggest that if I'm going to send something to a publisher, a good idea, that I also email it to a friend? How would you secure that? So that the great idea isn't going to be used by...
I wouldn't send it to them.
Is it for non-fiction? Sorry, is that for non-fiction?
Yeah, non-fiction. There's quite a few that say ideas are welcome.
Yeah, for non-fiction that's quite common. For fiction it's completely, you wouldn't do it.
Right.
As Kevin said.
So for the non-fiction, you can send them an outline and ideas, and you're fairly safe.
Well,
ish.
Check them out. Make sure the publishers are publishing writers and artists. That they've got a good website.
See what they've published before.
Yeah, do a Google search. See who else.
Yeah, it's very easy to
say about them.
Yeah, we do.
For fiction, you would say.
No.
Absolutely not.
Non-fiction is quite a niche area, or because if you're submitting something in an idea that's quite a niche area, then I reckon that might be a little bit more dangerous. But I don't know.
I think ideas welcome itself, title and fiction.
That rings alarm bells.
Yeah.
Something like Banter.
Yeah, it's the same as Banter, isn't it? Yeah. Send us a check for £1,000.
Take it.
Research again.
I mean, if you've got an idea for something, write it. Get it done, write it.
Oh, yes. I mean, I do with everything. I write it down.
Yeah.
I've got notes everywhere. I've got things of envelopes everywhere. We've all done it everywhere. We've got...
Write it down, get it written.
The actual writing that's behind the idea.
I think we're always seeking validation for our work or our work. But I think, as everyone has said, just get your story down. Get it down first, and then you can move on. don't seek validation after chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. You'll never get anything done. You've got to finish it first, and then send it to D or whatever.
You can't
It's so tempting because you want to share it, don't you? You want to read it and say, oh yes, I can see where this is going. You know,
Which just takes patience. It's the amount of patience to.
It's very lonely.
Yeah.
You're very insular, really.
Yeah.
It's not like you can run around.
Well, everyone can start a story, but very few people can finish it.
Yeah, right.
I can attest to that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I've started with it. Yeah, it's 8:30 now.
So we want to thank you all for coming, and especially thank you to our panelists who did this all for free. There's 2 events you might be interested in next week. First of all, there's Kevin's book launch at Waterstones Bradford, and there Stephanie has a meeting with SYP with
It's an international sales manager from a new children's publisher. So he'll be talking about rights, but he'll also be talking about the general market. And again, he'll be talking about how to get published. And there is free Prosecco. That's a bonus. It's Leeds City Centre. It's a bar that's about a 5-minute walk from the city centre, and it's at Thursday at 7 p.m. But if any of you are particularly interested, good old pen and paper, write your email address, and I'll send you the details.
There's loads of like leaflets from Dee that you can look at, and some books from UCLAN Publishing. We're going to have the event up. It's been recorded, so it's going to be up on Facebook and on Twitter. We're going to have a write-up as well. We're going to let you know all the info about our panelists. And just again, big thank you for coming. Thank you.
And a big thank you to Elsa and Tori. Nice order.